The defining trauma of my fiancé's life is that his first love was killed by a drunk driver. I was just in a minor fender-bender, and the responding officer was his dead ex-girlfriend, alive and well. My car was still hissing, a soft, wounded sound that was almost lost in the steady drum of rain on the roof. The world was painted in strobing strokes of red and blue, the lights of her cruiser dancing across the wet asphalt, and the spiderweb crack in my windshield. My hands were shaking, not from the impact, which had been little more than a jolt in the sickening crunch of metal, but from the face looking in at me through the driver's side window. Her face was framed by the dark, dripping brim of her police cap, her expression a careful, professional mask. But it was a face I knew better than some of my own family's. It was the face from the single, worn photograph Liam kept in the back of his desk drawer. The face of the girl who had defined him, the ghost that had haunted every quiet moment of his life for the last 10 years. Chloe Rivera. The nameplate on her tactical vest read, Rivera. My breath caught in my throat. A sharp, painful little snag. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel, impossible trick of the light in my frayed nerves. But the mole was there, just above the left corner of her lip, the one Liam had once traced with his finger in that photo. His eyes clouded with a grief so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. Her eyes, a shade of green so dark they were almost black, were exactly as he described them, like looking into a forest at midnight. Right now, that forest was guarded, impenetrable. She showed no flicker of recognition, no sign that she was looking at the fiancé of the man who thought she'd been buried a decade ago. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Her voice was lower than I had imagined, clipped and professional. It held a note of authority that felt alien when paired with the soft, smiling face from the photograph. I shook my head, the motion feeling jerky and disconnected from my body. "No. I'm okay." My own voice was a whisper. Liam had told me the story on our third date. He wanted me to know everything, to understand the bedrock of his sorrow. He spoke of Chloe Rivera like she was a myth, a saint martyred on a lonely stretch of highway. They were 17 and possibly in love, the kind of love that feels like it's the first time it has ever existed in the universe. She was driving home from her part-time job at the library. A man who had had 6 beers at a local bar ran a red light. Her little Honda Civic didn't stand a chance. Liam had described the funeral, the closed casket, the unbearable silence of her parents. He told me how that loss had hollowed him out and then slowly, over years, rebuilt him into someone more careful, more tender, someone who understood the terrifying fragility of happiness. It was the defining story of his life. It was the reason he loved me so fiercely, he had said, because he knew what it was to lose everything in an instant. "License and registration, please," Officer Rivera said, her voice pulling me from the vortex of memory. My hands fumbled with the latch on the glove compartment. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I pulled out the worn leather folio and handed it to her, my gaze fixed on her face, searching for a crack in the facade. Nothing. She took them with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning the documents under the beam of her flashlight. She saw my name, my address, the address I share with Liam. Surely that would do something, a twitch, a falter. But her expression remained a flat, professional calm. She saw the picture on my license, my smiling, oblivious face, and then her eyes met mine again. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a flicker of panic, of deep, cold fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same detached authority. She treated me like any other motorist in a minor collision. She took my statement, spoke to the teenager who had slid into my bumper, and handed us both slips of paper with case numbers on them. The whole time, a scream was building in my chest, a wild, frantic sound that wanted to claw its way out. I wanted to grab the front of her uniform and shout her name, to demand an explanation for the decade of lies, for the mountain of grief she had allowed to be built in her name. I wanted to ask her if she had any idea what she had done to him. But I was paralyzed, trapped in the surreal horror of it all. As she walked back to her cruiser, her duty done, she gave me one last look. It wasn't a look of recognition or apology. It was a warning, a silent, desperate plea to leave it alone. Then she was gone, her taillights disappearing into the relentless gray rain. I sat there for a long time, the only sounds the ticking of my cooling engine and the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. The drive home was a fugue state. The world outside my windows was a watercolor blur of streetlights and taillights bleeding into the wet darkness. My hands, still trembling, felt disconnected from my arms as they gripped the steering wheel. The 10-minute journey stretched into an eternity. Each rotation of the tires a question pounding in my skull. Why? How? Why? The warning in her eyes was the sharpest memory, a silent, desperate command to bury what I had seen. But how do you bury a person who was already supposed to be in the ground? My mind reeled, constructing and discarding frantic theories. Witness protection? A faked death to escape a dangerous situation? A long-lost identical twin? Each possibility felt more ludicrous and terrifying than the last. The simple, brutal fact was that Chloe Rivera, the sainted ghost of Liam's past, was alive, and she knew exactly who I was. My phone buzzed in the center console, jolting me back to reality. It was Liam. His picture, a goofy selfie we'd taken on a hike, filled the screen. My heart seized. I couldn't tell him. The words would sound like madness, like a cruel and desperate delusion brought on by the shock of the accident. He would think I was concussed, or worse, that I was losing my mind. The life felt like swallowing shards of glass, but it was the only thing I could do. I swiped to answer, trying to force my voice into a semblance of normalcy. "Hey," I managed, my voice thin and reedy. "Liam, I'm so sorry, I'm running late. I was in a little fender-bender." His voice when it came was a torrent of panicked concern. "What? Are you okay? Where are you? Do I need to come get you?" His immediate leap to care, to protection, was a familiar comfort that now felt like a hot poker against my conscience. No, I'm fine, really. The car's drivable, just a dented bumper. The other driver was fine too. The police came, we exchanged information, it's all handled. I'm just a little shaken up. A police officer. Singular. I couldn't bring myself to say she. Walking into our apartment was like stepping onto a stage. The warm glow of the lamps, the scent of the dinner he was keeping warm for me, the soft jazz playing from the speaker in the corner. It was a scene of perfect, tranquil domesticity, and I was an imposter in it. Liam met me at the door, his hands immediately finding my face, his thumbs stroking my cheeks as his worried eyes scanned me for injury. "You're sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice low and laced with a fear that I knew was rooted in that 10-year-old trauma. This was the man who always insisted on driving in bad weather, who texted me if I was 5 minutes late, who loved me with a fierce protective energy born from the absolute certainty that the universe could snatch away your happiness in a single brutal moment. And the source of that certainty, the cornerstone of his entire emotional architecture, was a lie.
He thought he was protecting me from the dangers of the world, while I was protecting him from the truth of it. He fussed over me, wrapping me in a blanket and sitting me on the couch with a cup of tea I couldn't drink. He went out into the rain with a flashlight to inspect the damage to my car, his shoulders slumped with a mixture of relief and frustration. While he was gone, I moved on autopilot, my body carrying me down the hall to his office. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I needed to see it. I needed to be sure. His office was neat, organized, a reflection of his methodical mind. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the old wooden desk, my fingers closing around the cool brass pull of the bottom right drawer. It slid open with a soft groan. There, tucked beneath a stack of old notebooks, was the photo. It was worn at the edges, the paper softened from years of being held. And there she was, 17, smiling into the camera. Her hair a little wild, her eyes full of a light I hadn't seen tonight. The mole above her lip was unmistakable. It was her. The ghost in the machine, the girl in the drawer, the officer on the highway. It was all real. I sank to the floor, the photograph trembling in my hand, my breath coming in ragged, silent sobs. The sheer scale of the deception was crushing, a weight I couldn't possibly comprehend. Who was she? And who in God's name was the man I was supposed to marry? "What are you doing?" Liam's voice, quiet and laced with confusion, cut through the silence from the doorway. I froze, the photograph clutched in my hand like a weapon, my back to the man whose entire life was about to be torn apart. My blood ran cold. The sound of his voice was so gentle, so out of place in the screaming chaos of my mind. I couldn't turn around. If I saw the love and concern in his eyes, I would shatter completely. My fingers, slick with sweat, tightened on the photograph, crinkling the edge of a decade-old memory. A lie. A plausible lie. I just needed to find one. My mind was a blank white wall of panic. I could say I was looking for a stamp, that I was tidying up, that I was just being nosy, but my ragged, choked breaths and the tear tracks on my cheeks would betray any simple excuse. The silence stretched, thin and humming, and I knew I had to face him. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet and turned, keeping the hand with the photo pressed against my leg, hidden from his view. He had taken off his wet jacket, and his hair was damp from the rain, curling slightly at his temples. The worried expression was still there, but now it was layered with a deep, furrowed confusion. He took a step into the room. "Hey," he said, softly, his voice the one he used when I'd had a nightmare. "Talk to me. What's going on? You're white as a sheet." He took another step, his eyes scanning the open drawer, then my face, then my clenched hand. "What are you holding?" It was a simple question, but it felt like a final judgment. My body moved before my mind could stop it, a pathetic, jerky motion to slide the picture back into the drawer, but my hands were trembling too badly. The photo slipped from my grasp and fluttered to the floor, landing face up in the soft light of his desk lamp. Chloe's smile seemed to mock us both from the floorboards. Liam's gaze followed it down. For a moment, he just stared. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. He didn't look angry, not yet, just a profound, wounded confusion. "Why?" he whispered, his eyes lifting back to mine. He thought this was about jealousy, about my insecurity unearthing the ghost he so carefully kept locked away. The sheer tragic irony of it was a fresh stab of pain.
"Liam," I started, my voice a raw croak. "Something happened tonight. At the accident." His expression softened immediately, the flicker of hurt replaced by the familiar rush of concern. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands coming up to grip my arms gently. "I know, baby. A fender-bender can be terrifying, but we're not going to let it ruin the night. It's just a car." He was trying to soothe me, to pull me back from a ledge he couldn't even see. "No," I said, shaking my head, emotion frantic. "You don't understand. The police officer? The one who responded?" The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy and misshapen. I had to force them out. "Liam, it was her." He blinked, his brow furrowed. "Her who? What are you talking about?" He was trying to follow a trail that led off a cliff. I took a shaking breath, my eyes locked on his, pleading with him to believe me before I even said the words. The officer was Chloe. For a single, breathless second, there was nothing. Just the sound of the rain against the window and the hum of the computer. Then, a small, sharp sound escaped his lips. It wasn't a laugh, not really. It was a bark of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "What?" he said, his hands dropping from my arms as if I'd burned him. "Don't say that. That's not funny." "I'm not being funny," my voice cracked, rising with the hysteria I'd been suppressing for hours. "I saw her. I spoke to her. She has the same mole, right here." I pointed to the spot above my own lip. "She looked right at me, Liam. She knew who I was." His face, which had been a canvas of concern, hardened into something I didn't recognize. The softness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. It was the anger of a man defending a sacred tomb. "Stop it," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Just stop. You were in an accident. You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly. This is the clearest I've been all night." I bent down, snatching the photo from the floor and shoving it towards him. "Look, it's her. She's older. She was wearing a uniform, but it was her." He flinched back from the photograph as if it were a snake. "For God's sake, what is wrong with you?" he exploded, his voice finally breaking its restraint, echoing in the small office. "She is dead. I went to her funeral. I watched them lower her casket into the ground. How dare you use my trauma, use her to what? To get attention? To create some drama because you were in a fender-bender?" The accusation struck me with the force of a physical blow. I recoiled, gasping. He saw me not as a partner sharing a horrifying truth, but as a cruel, hysterical woman desecrating a memory. The chasm opening between us was terrifying, a dark, bottomless rift. The warm, safe world of our apartment had just frozen over, and we were standing on opposite sides, two strangers shivering in the sudden, bitter cold. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and glittering as shards of ice. "To get attention?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. The shock was so profound it felt like it had hollowed out my bones, leaving me weightless and empty. This man, who had held me through fevers and failures, who knew the most fragile parts of my soul, was looking at me as if I were a stranger, a monster capable of such casual cruelty. The hurt was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest so severe I thought my heart might simply stop. He didn't see a terrified woman trying to share an impossible truth. He saw a performance, an act, a manipulative play for a spotlight that had always in his life belonged to a ghost. "I don't know. To make tonight about you?" He shot back, his hands gesturing wildly, a sign of his complete loss of control. "I tell you about my day, about the deal falling through, and suddenly you're seeing ghosts on the side of the highway? Do you hear how insane that sounds?" He started pacing the small office, a caged animal in a space that had always been our sanctuary of shared work and late-night conversations. I carried her eulogy in my pocket for a year, afraid to throw it away. I helped her father pick out the headstone. I watched them put her in the ground, for God's sake. It was the worst day of my life. And you wanna what? Dig it all up because you saw a cop with a similar face? Every word was a hammer blow, meant to beat my story back into the realm of fantasy. But with the pain, a new feeling began to stir. A cold, hard knot of anger. He wasn't listening. He wasn't even trying. He was so wrapped up in the tapestry of his own grief that he couldn't see the gaping hole that had just been torn in it. "You think I wanted this?" I finally said, my voice rising, gaining a strength I didn't know I had. "You think I wanted to have my car wrecked and then come face to face with the woman you've mourned for 10 years? You think this is a fun story for me to tell? This is a nightmare, Liam. And instead of waking me up, you're telling me I'm the monster." I followed him out of the office as he stalked into the living room, needing to make him see me, to break through the wall of denial he was building brick by painful brick. I am not hysterical. I am not in shock. I know what I saw. He spun around, his face pale and tight with fury. "No, you know what you think you saw. There's a difference. It's called trauma-induced confirmation bias. You see a mole, you see a vague resemblance, and your brain, rattled from the crash, fills in the blanks with the biggest, most dramatic story it can find. It's textbook." He was using his calm, rational business deal voice on me now, dissecting my experience as if it were a flawed quarterly report. It was infinitely more infuriating than his shouting. "It was her," I insisted, my voice dropping, low and intense. "She wrote down her name. Officer Davies. Chloe Davies." His face flickered. For a split second, I saw a crack in the armor. The name spoken aloud had landed. But then the walls slammed back down harder than before. "Stop it. Just stop saying her name." He ran a hand through his hair, his back to me now, staring out the window at the rain-streaked city lights. The fight was draining out of him, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "I can't do this. I can't." And that's when I knew. Words weren't enough. His grief was a fortress, and my story was a battering ram made of glass. I needed proof. I needed something tangible, something he couldn't dismiss as a hallucination. My mind raced, replaying the last few hours. The flashing lights, the screech of tires, the officer at my window, the paperwork, the business card. My breath hitched. "My purse," I said, the words tumbling out. "She gave me her card. It's in my purse." I turned and ran to the entryway I'd dropped it hours ago, my hands fumbling with the clasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope
and terror. This was it. This would prove it. I wouldn't be crazy anymore. I dumped the contents onto the small entryway table. Keys, wallet, a stray lipstick, crumpled receipts. There. A small, crisp, white rectangle. I snatched it up, my hands still shaking, and turned back to him. He hadn't moved. He was watching me with an expression of profound pity, as if I were a child clinging to a fairy tale. "Here," I said, my voice trembling as I held it out to him. "Look, it has her name, her badge number, a phone number. We can call it. We can prove it." He didn't take it. He just stared at my outstretched hand, at the small piece of cardstock that held the power to either vindicate me or shatter our life completely. "Please, Liam," I begged. "Just look." Slowly, he turned his head away, breaking eye contact. The refusal was quiet, but it was absolute. "I don't want to look," he said, his voice thick with a final, heartbreaking resolve. "I want you to go to bed. I want us to wake up tomorrow and pretend this insane conversation never happened." He finally turned back to me, and the look in his eyes was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It was a choice. He was choosing the story he'd lived with for a decade over the woman standing in front of him. "And I want you to throw that card away. If you make that call, if you chase this delusion, you are choosing it over us." He walked past me, not to our bedroom, but to the spare room at the end of the hall, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent apartment, a sound of finality that left me standing alone in the wreckage. The click of the latch was a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the apartment. I stood frozen in the entryway, the business card a small, cold weight in my palm. My fingers were numb. My whole body felt like it was encased in ice, a statue of a woman who had just watched her world cleave in two. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the whisper of rain against the window pane, normal sounds from a life that was no longer normal. The air was thick with everything he hadn't said, with the chasm he had just opened between us. He didn't want the truth. He wanted the story he'd built his life around, the tragic, romantic narrative of a love lost too soon. A story that had a beginning, a middle, and a neat, tidy end. My story, our story now, was a messy, terrifying scribble, and he had simply refused to read it. I sank onto the small bench by the door, my legs giving out. I stared at the closed door to the spare room. It was a physical barrier, a declaration. He had chosen to sleep in there, to put a wall between us rather than face the possibility that his defining trauma was a lie. The pity in his eyes was what haunted me the most. He hadn't just been angry, he had looked at me with a profound, sorrowful condescension, as if I were a child who had woken from a nightmare and couldn't distinguish it from reality. He had diagnosed me, dismissed me, and then abandoned me all in the space of 10 minutes. The love of my life thought I was losing my mind, and the most frightening part was that his conviction was so absolute, it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But I had the card. I turned it over and over in my fingers, the sharp corners digging into my skin. Officer Chloe Davies. Badge number 714. A phone number for the precinct. It was real. It was tangible. It wasn't a memory or a trauma-induced hallucination. It was a piece of paper handed to me by a living, breathing woman, a woman whose death had been the foundation of my fiancé's adult life. "Throw it away," he'd said. "Choose us." But it wasn't a choice between a delusion and our relationship. It was a choice between a lie and the truth. And living in his comfortable, tragic lie would mean erasing myself, erasing my own sanity to protect his carefully constructed grief. I couldn't do it. The person he wanted me to be tomorrow morning, pliant, forgetful, apologetic, was a stranger to me. I wouldn't know how to pretend. A cold resolve settled over me, pushing aside the initial shock and pain. I stood up, my movements stiff, and walked into the office we shared. The space that had felt like a sanctuary of collaboration now felt like a battleground. I sat down at my laptop,
the screen glowing in the darkened room. I didn't want to call the number. Not yet. That felt too direct, too final. A confrontation I wasn't ready for. I needed more. I needed to see it for myself in a way that couldn't be argued or interpreted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. I opened a web browser and typed her name into the search bar. Chloe Davies. I added the name of the town, the police department. The results were generic. A few local news articles mentioning the department in passing, a link to the official city website. Nothing with her name. Nothing that proved anything. My heart sank. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was a new officer, a bizarre coincidence of a name. But I couldn't let it go. I opened a new tab. Facebook. I typed her name into the social media search bar. Dozens of Chloe Davies profiles popped up. I scrolled, my heart pounding with a sick, frantic rhythm. I adjusted the search filters, narrowing it down by location. And then I saw it. A profile picture of a woman in her early 30s, smiling into the camera, her hair a familiar shade of dark blonde pulled back from her face. She was standing on a hiking trail, mountains in the background. It wasn't a police uniform, but it was her. The mall above her lip was unmistakable. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. My hand trembled as I clicked on the profile. It was public. The timeline was a mural of a life that never was supposed to have happened. A photo from 2 weeks ago, clicking beer glasses with friends on a patio. A post from last Christmas, a group shot with her family. I zoomed in, my blood running cold. There she was, arm in arm with the same gray-haired man and smiling woman from the framed photo on Liam's nightstand. Her parents. The people he had grieved with. The people who had supposedly buried their only daughter a decade ago. They were all there, smiling, alive, and together. I kept scrolling, a voyeur to an impossible existence. A video of her playing with a golden retriever in a backyard, a check-in at a concert last spring, a birthday post from her father dated just 3 months ago. Happy 31st to our amazing girl, we're so proud of you. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a woman who had survived. This was a life that had continued, celebrated, and documented, completely in plain sight, while the man I loved built a shrine to her memory. The truth wasn't just that Chloe was alive. The truth was a sprawling, intricate lie, and her entire family was in on it. The click of the latch was a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the apartment. I stood frozen in the entryway. The business card a small, cold weight in my palm. My fingers were numb. My whole body felt like it was encased in ice, a statue of a woman who had just watched her world cleave in two. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the whisper of rain against the window pane. Normal sounds from a life that was no longer normal. The air was thick with everything he hadn't said, with the chasm he had just opened between us. He didn't want the truth. He wanted the story he had built his life around, the tragic, romantic narrative of a love lost too soon. A story that had a beginning, a middle, and a neat, tidy end. My story, our story now, was a messy, terrifying scribble, and he had simply refused to read it. I sank onto the small bench by the door, my legs giving out. I stared at the closed door to the spare room. It was a physical barrier, a declaration. He had chosen to sleep in there, to put a wall between us, rather than face the possibility that his defining trauma was a lie. The pity in his eyes was what haunted me the most. He hadn't just been angry, he had looked at me with a profound, sorrowful condescension, as if I were a child who had woken from a nightmare and couldn't distinguish it from reality. He had diagnosed me, dismissed me, and then abandoned me, all in the space of 10 minutes. The love of my life thought I was losing my mind. And the most frightening part was that his conviction was so absolute, it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But I had the card. I turned it over and over in my fingers, the sharp corners digging into my skin. Officer Chloe Davies, badge number 714. A phone number for the precinct. It was real. It was tangible. It wasn't a memory or a trauma-induced hallucination. It was a piece of paper handed to me by a living, breathing woman. A woman whose death had been the foundation of my fiancé's adult life. Throw it away, he said. Choose us. But it wasn't a choice between a delusion and our relationship. It was a choice between a lie and the truth. And living in his comfortable tragic lie would mean erasing myself, erasing my own sanity to protect his carefully constructed grief. I couldn't do it. The person he wanted me to be tomorrow morning, pliant, forgetful, apologetic, was a stranger to me. I wouldn't know how to pretend. A cold resolve settled over me, pushing aside the initial shock and pain. I stood up, my movements stiff, and walked into the office we shared. The space that had felt like a sanctuary of collaboration now felt like a battleground. I sat down at my laptop, the screen glowing in the darkened room. I didn't want to call the number. Not yet. That felt too direct, too final. A confrontation I wasn't ready for. I needed more. I need to see it for myself, in a way that couldn't be argued or interpreted. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking slightly. I opened a web browser and typed her name into the search bar. Chloe Davies. I added the name of the town, the police department. The results were generic. A few local news articles mentioning the department in passing, a link to the official city website. Nothing with her name, nothing that proved anything. My heart sank. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was a new officer, a bizarre coincidence of a name. But I couldn't let it go. I opened a new tab. Facebook. I typed her name into the social media search bar. Dozens of Chloe Davies profiles popped up. I scrolled, my heart pounding with a sick, frantic rhythm. I adjusted the search filters, narrowing it down by location. And then I saw it. A profile picture of a woman in her early 30s, smiling into the camera, her hair a familiar shade of dark blonde pulled back from her face. She was standing on a hiking trail, mountains in the background. It wasn't a police uniform, but it was her. The mole above her lip was unmistakable. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sudden sharp gasp. My hand trembled as I clicked on the profile. It was public. The timeline was a mural of a life that was never supposed to have happened. A photo from 2 weeks ago clinking beer glasses with friends on a patio. A post from last Christmas, a group shot with her family. I zoomed in, my blood running cold. There she was, arm in arm with the same gray-haired man and smiling woman from the framed photo on Liam's nightstand, her parents, the people he had grieved with, the people who had supposedly buried their only daughter a decade ago. They were all there, smiling, alive, and together. I kept scrolling, a voyeur to an impossible existence. A video of her playing with a golden retriever in a backyard. A check-in at a concert last spring. A birthday post from her father dated just 3 months ago. Happy 31st to our amazing girl. We're so proud of you. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a woman who had survived. This was a life that had continued, celebrated, and documented completely in plain sight, while the man I loved built a shrine to her memory. The truth wasn't just that Chloe was alive. The truth was a sprawling, intricate lie, and her entire family was in on it. The nausea receded, replaced by something colder, sharper. It was the chilling clarity that follows an explosion, when the ringing in your ears subsides and you can finally see the full extent of the damage. I wasn't just looking at a woman's social media profile. I was looking at the architecture of a decade-long deception, meticulously maintained and brazenly public. They hadn't just lied, they had built a whole new world on top of the old one and invited everyone but Liam to the housewarming. The pity I'd felt for him, the man trapped in a beautiful, tragic snow globe of his own making, curdled into a strange and unfamiliar anger. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a conspiracy, and I was now unwillingly a part of it. The lie had been his, but its discovery was mine, and the burden of it was crushing me. I closed the laptop, plunging the room back into darkness. Staying here, in this apartment filled with his curated grief, felt like suffocating. Every framed photo, every story he'd ever told me about her, was now an artifact in a museum of lies. I couldn't spend the night under the same roof as the man who looked at my truth and called it madness. I stood up, moving with a new, brittle purpose. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and slipped on my shoes, my movements silent and deliberate. I didn't take a bag, I didn't pack anything. I was just leaving, escaping the pressure of the four walls that demanded I choose delusion over reality. As my hand closed over the doorknob, I glanced back at the closed door to the spare room. He was in there, sleeping the peaceful sleep of the willfully ignorant, while my entire world burned down around me. I turned the lock as quietly as I could and slipped out into the pre-dawn quiet of the hallway. The drive was a blur of streetlights and empty roads. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a direction, a way. But as the city skyline faded in my rearview mirror, a plan began to form, sharp and dangerous. I had the name of her town from a location tag on one of her photos. It was an hour and a half away, a small, forgettable suburb that held the answer to everything. What was I going to do? Knock on her door? Confront her in the driveway? I didn't know. I just knew that I couldn't go back to Liam until I had something more than screenshots and a business card. I needed a confession. I needed to look into the eyes of the people who did this and see for myself. The car ate up the miles, and with each one, the fear was burned away by a cold, righteous fury. They had stolen 10 years of his life. They had built my relationship on a foundation of sand. They owed me an explanation. I found the house easily. It was exactly as it appeared in the pictures, a pleasant blue colonial with white shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn. A golden retriever, the same one from the video, was asleep on the porch. It was so aggressively normal, it felt like a movie set. I parked across the street, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. For a long time, I just sat there, the engine off, watching the house as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gray. I was a stranger here, an interloper about to detonate a bomb in the heart of this quiet suburban life. My hand trembled as I finally got out of the car. Each step up the stone walkway felt monumental. I reached the front door and hesitated for only a second before ringing the bell.
I saw the flicker of panic, the instinct to slam the door in my face. I spoke before she could. "You know who I am," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She just stared, her hand tightening on the doorknob. "I'm Liam's fiancée," I added, letting the words hang in the air between us. Her face crumpled slightly. The carefully constructed facade of a normal morning was shattering right in front of me. "You need to leave," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Please, just go." I didn't move. I just held her gaze. "He thinks he's mourning you," I said, my voice low and raw. "He thinks he's mourning your daughter. For 10 years. I need you to tell me why." She tried to close the door, but I held my ground. A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "It was the only way," she choked out. "You don't understand what he was like, what he was becoming." Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us both flinch. A police cruiser. My blood ran cold as I watched Chloe, very much alive and in uniform, get out of the car. She looked tired, her shift likely just ending. She glanced toward the porch, saw me standing in the doorway with her weeping mother, and froze. Her eyes, the same eyes I'd seen in the rearview mirror just days ago, locked with mine. The crunch of Chloe's footsteps on the gravel driveway was the only sound in the world, each one a sharp crack in the morning quiet. She moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, her face a mask of professional composure, but her eyes, those same sharp, intelligent eyes from my rearview mirror, were wide with a decade's worth of buried fear. Her mother shrank back, half hiding behind the screen door, her sobs now silent, choked things. Chloe stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her hand resting almost unconsciously on the butt of her service weapon. The gesture wasn't a threat, not directly.
It was an instinct, a muscle memory of protection, that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Protection from what? Or from whom? "You need to go," Chloe said, her voice low and even, but brittle around the edges. It was the same tone she had used on the side of the road, the voice of authority trying to control a situation spiraling out of her grasp. I just shook my head, a small, stubborn movement. "Not until you tell me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Your mother said, she said I don't understand what he was becoming." At the mention of her words, Chloe's mother let out a small, wounded sound from the doorway. Chloe's gaze flickered to her, then back to me, her composure finally cracking. "He wasn't grieving," Chloe said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of a truth she had lived, and I was only just discovering. Grief is what happens after you lose someone. What Liam had, it was there before. It was an ownership. He was building a cage around me piece by piece and calling it love. The story came out in broken pieces, first from Chloe, then filled in with her mother's tearful interjections. It wasn't a drunk driver. There was no accident. There was just a fight, one of many, but this one was different. It was on a dark road after he'd followed her from a friend's house, convinced she was lying to him about who she was with. He'd grabbed the wheel in a fit of jealous rage, his face contorted into something she didn't recognize. The car had swerved violently. They hadn't crashed, really, but in that terrifying moment, she saw the future. She saw that his love wasn't a safe harbor, it was a riptide, and it was pulling her under. So they ran. Her father, a man with connections, helped orchestrate it all. They used the near accident as a seed, planting a story that would grow into an impenetrable wall between her and Liam.
They faked a death certificate. They held a closed casket funeral for an empty box. They killed her so she could finally be free. She became a cop, she explained, her eyes hard, to understand the system that had no language for the kind of danger she was in, and to make sure she could protect herself if he ever found out. I listened, my righteous fury dissolving into a thick, choking dread. Every word they spoke was a key, unlocking memories I had dismissed or explained away. Liam's insistence on knowing my schedule, the subtle ways he isolated me from my friends, his disproportionate anger when I once forgot to call him after a night out, his immediate dismissal of my truth about the fender-bender, his assumption that I was hysterical, unreliable, broken. It wasn't the protective nature of a man who had lost everything. It was the calculated control of a man terrified of losing his grip. The shrine in our apartment wasn't a memorial to a dead woman. It was a trophy. It was a testament to the one who got away, a perfect, idealized love frozen in time, a love that could never disappoint him, never leave him, never defy him. And I was supposed to be the sequel, the living replacement for the perfect dead girl. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I just turned and walked away, a hollowed-out shell of the person who had arrived that morning. The drive back was a funereal procession for the man I thought I knew and the life I thought I had. The city skyline grew larger, no longer a beacon of home, but the silhouette of a prison I had almost willingly walked into. I saw it all with horrifying clarity. The love bombing, the slow erosion of my own instincts, the way he'd made his trauma the center of our universe until my own world shrank to fit inside it. He hadn't just been grieving Chloe, he had been curating her, perfecting her story, and in doing so, he had been grooming me to step into the vacancy. When I walked through the door of our apartment, he was there, pacing in the living room. The relief on his face was immediately followed by a flicker of anger. "Where have you been? I was going out of my mind. Your phone was off." He moved toward me, his arms outstretched to pull me into an embrace, to absorb me back into his narrative. I took a step back. The movement was small, but it was a tectonic shift. It was the first boundary I had ever truly set. He stopped, his arms falling to his sides, confusion clouding his features. "What is it? What's wrong?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. I saw past the charming smile and the sad, soulful eyes. I saw the possessiveness masquerading as passion, the control disguised as concern. I saw the cage he had been building for me, its bars gilded with his tragic, perfect, beautiful lie. The truth was a weapon in my hands, heavy and cold.
I could use it to destroy him, to shatter the fantasy he'd lived in for a decade, or I could lay it down, turn around, and walk away, leaving him alone in his museum of ghosts. He stood there, waiting for an answer. The man I had promised to marry, now a complete and terrifying stranger. What would you do? Let us know in the comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.